Good morning, everyone. Hello, Gita, Gabriella, Bradley, Jens, Kevin, Edward, and Elaine. Good to see you all here. So this morning we will be studying the second part of the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta, and there is a link on the live chat. Welcome to Kyle, the inventor and creator of the BNN tagline. Welcome to Liz. And welcome to Stan, who just jumped in the room right now. Hopefully he won't go and attack the altar. Flowers, we hope. Do anything too crazy. All right, so whenever Bhante is ready, we can start.
Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassa. Good morning, friends. And today we will hopefully finish up the Mahāpuṇṇama Sutta, Majjhima Nikāya 109. So we had left off where the Buddha was about to answer a question on self-identity. So I'll go ahead and start reading from the sutta and give some explanations here and there. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So the Buddha, the monk talking to the Buddha asks, Bhante, how is their belief in self-identity? So in Pali, that's Sakkaya Ditthi. So Sakkaya Ditthi is one of the major fetters to awakening. So it's the critical fetter for attaining stream entry. So one must overcome Sakkaya Ditthi in order to become a stream enterer. So Sakkaya Ditthi is, in particular, it's what we think of as me, what we relate to as me, what we believe to be me. So belief in self-identity, it's what we believe as me, what we see as being ourselves. So the Buddha answers, here, monk, an unlearned ordinary person, that's asuttava patujana. Ayasoma always gets really happy when she hears this phrase. So she just got this big smile when I said asuttava patujana. So an unlearned ordinary person, one who does not see noble beings, who has not mastered the teachings of noble beings, who is undisciplined in the teachings of noble beings, who does not see good people, has not mastered the teachings of good people, and is undisciplined in the teachings of good people, regards the body as his self, or the body as owned by his self, or the body as contained within his self, or his self as contained within the body. And then the same with the four mental khandhas. So feeling, recognition, thoughts, and consciousness. So for each one, identifying it as oneself, as contained within oneself is contained within it. So as oneself, owned by oneself, within oneself, or oneself within it. So these four ways of having a self-identity in relationship to something. So here the Buddha defines Sakkaya Ditthi as having some concept of self in relationship to the five khandhas. And the most obvious of these is usually body. So starting with body, it's regarding the body as me. So this is especially popular with scientific materialists. So believing that this body is me. This is who I am. This chunk of meat and bones is me. The second one, regarding the body as owned by oneself. So this body belongs to me. It's my possession. It's something which I own. The third one, the body is contained within oneself. So this is the belief that one has some kind of larger soul or self, and the body is contained within it. So for example, the belief, I am the universe, perceiving the universe through this body, that would be the belief that the body is contained within oneself. And then the fourth one, oneself is contained within the body. So that's the belief that somewhere inside the body is your true self. Your soul is inside the body somewhere. So all four of these are considered wrong view in Buddhism. They're considered a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the body, and a addition of the concept of self where it doesn't apply. And then the same with the other khandhas. So regarding feeling, recognition, thoughts, or consciousness as being oneself, which is, again, the most common. We think our feelings and thoughts and perceptions are me, or we think that they're mine. These are the most common ways that we relate to the aspects of mind. We think these thoughts are me, or these thoughts are mine. We think these feelings are me, or these feelings are mine. We think this consciousness is me, or this consciousness is mine. We think of the mind's components as being contained within ourselves. Again, this idea that there's this larger soul or self or being, and these mind components are contained within it. Or we think that our self or soul is contained within the mind components. Again, all of these are considered wrong view, a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the five khandhas. To impute a sense of me, a sense of mine, a sense of self in any way on the five khandhas. So the term Sakkaya Ditthi, by the way, Sakkaya literally means self-body or own body. But Kaya can also mean group rather than specifically body. So it can also mean self-group, which I think is a bit closer to the meaning here. So the whole group of the five khandhas, one regards as being oneself. So this is another mode, which is, it's not specifically mentioned here, but we see it in some other suttas, which is taking the whole mass of the five khandhas together as being oneself. So rather than an individual one, taking the whole conglomerate mass together as constituting oneself, which of course also is wrong view. So this is important because Sakkaya, since it can literally mean own body or self-body, then some people then emphasize the body. But here the Buddha clearly states that it's all five khandhas. It's the sense of self in relation to all five of the khandhas. Then the monk asked the Buddha, Bhante, how is there no belief in self-identity? And the Buddha replies, here, monk, a learned disciple of the noble ones, that's Arya Savaka. So Arya Savaka, by the way, you'll often see translated as noble disciple. But as I mentioned yesterday, word compounds in Pali are often quite unclear in their meaning because there's no explicit statement of the relationship between the words and the compounds. So the relationship between the words in any given compound has to be inferred. So Arya Savaka is made of two parts. So Arya means noble or noble being, and Savaka means disciple. And Savaka literally means listener. So Arya Savaka. So Arya Savaka can mean disciple of the noble ones, or it could mean a disciple who is a noble one. My reason for taking it as disciple of the noble ones is because this is talking about someone who is not enlightened yet. It's talking about somebody who is not enlightened yet, but who is working on making progress towards enlightenment. So it makes more sense to relate to them as being someone who is a disciple of the noble ones rather than somebody who is already a noble being. So here, monk, a learned disciple of the noble ones, the Buddha continues. One who sees noble beings, has mastered the teachings of noble beings, is well disciplined in the teachings of noble beings, who sees good people, has mastered the teachings of good people, and is well disciplined in the teachings of good people. Another little note here. So this description, it says one who sees noble beings, one who sees good people. You may also see this translated as one who has regard for noble beings, one who has regard for good people. So it also indicates a certain amount of respect for those who have attained awakening and for those who have strong virtue, strong wisdom. So such a person does not regard the body as his self, does not regard the body as owned by his self, does not regard the body as contained within his self, and does not regard his self as contained within the body. And the same with feeling, recognition, thoughts, and consciousness. So with all 5 khandhas, to not regard them as being oneself or owned by oneself, as within oneself, or oneself is within them. So to work on cutting all of this off. So this also can be a meditation practice on not self, by the way. On cultivating anatta sanya, is to go through your 5 khandhas in each of these 4 modes and to clearly see the body is not myself, the body is not owned by me, I am not within the body is not within me. And then same with the other 4 khandhas. So you can do this as a meditation practice of cycling through the 5 khandhas in these 4 modes. So people sometimes say that there's not enough instruction on how to do anatta sanya, the meditation on not self, but actually the Buddha gives lots of ways of doing it all throughout the suttas. So next, the questioner asks the Buddha, Bhante, as regards the body, what is the gratification, what is the drawback, and what is the escape? As regards feeling, recognition, thoughts, and consciousness, what is the gratification, what is the drawback, and what is the escape? So this is a set of 3 contemplations which the Buddha mentions in many, many places throughout the suttas. So to contemplate the gratification, the drawback, and the escape in regard to any conditional phenomena, in regard to any sankhara. So we pay attention to the gratification because we need to understand why and how we get caught in samsara, why and how we get lost into attachment and obsession in samsara. And we need to understand the drawback, the disadvantage, because that's how we can start to break our blind obsession with things. And we need to understand the escape, because it's through cultivating the escape that we're able to attain liberation, that we're able to attain awakening. So here the Buddha explains gratification, drawback, and escape in regard to the 5 khandhas. He says, monk, there is pleasure and elation that arises dependent on the body. This is the gratification as regards the body. The body is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to alteration. This is the drawback as regards the body. The removal of interest and passion as regards the body, the abandoning of interest and passion as regards the body, this is the escape as regards the body. So the first one, the pleasure and elation that arises dependent on the body. So any kind of joy or happiness or pleasure, any kind of pleasant experience that's based on the body. So there's a lot of ways that we can have pleasant experiences with our bodies, produce enjoyable sensations through the body. So that's why we get obsessed with our bodies. It's why we get attached to our bodies, because there's no denying there's pleasure to be had with the body. So we acknowledge that. It's like, yeah, there is pleasure that we can have through the body. We need to admit that and see it clearly and understand it clearly. If we don't see it clearly, then we'll get lost in it very easily. The second thing is recognizing that the body is impermanent, unsatisfactory, and subject to alteration. And this word translated as alteration, in Pali, it's viparinama, which it can mean change in an ordinary sense, but it usually has the meaning of catastrophic change, like things changing in a really bad way. So it does have the meaning of changing, but it usually has the connotation of changing in a very bad way, a harmful way, an unpleasant way. So he says, this is the drawback as regards the body. So in other words, our body is not a reliable source of happiness because it's impermanent, unsatisfying, and subject to change. So whatever pleasant experiences we're having through our body need to be recognized as impermanent, as ultimately unsatisfying, and as subject to unwanted change. So we can't rely on it. And if we try to rely on the pleasure that comes through the body, then we will be disappointed, constantly and repeatedly disappointed, because it's not capable of providing a reliable, ongoing, ultimately satisfying form of happiness. And the solution is to abandon our interest, desire, and passion regarding the body. So to see the body as just being a body, just part of samsara, just a blob of earth, water, heat, and air. That's all it is. And it's not really anything special. It's just dirt, water, heat, and air, like everything else. Then he applies the same evaluation to the four mental khandhas. So evaluating the gratification, the drawback, and the escape in regard to all four of the components of mind. So for each one, seeing the pleasure and elation that arises based on it, recognizing that it's impermanent, unsatisfying, and subject to change, and removing one's interest, desire, and passion regarding each component. Then the monk asks, Bhante, how does one know and see such that there is no I-making, my-making, or tendency towards conceit as regards this body, its consciousness, and all external appearances? In other words, how can we develop the perception of not self in such a way that we completely let go of all of our conceit, all of our attachment to self-existence, all of our self-attachment, self-centeredness. Because ultimately, this is the goal of all Buddhist practice, is to overcome self-centeredness, to let go of self-centeredness, to transcend self-centeredness. That's what all of this is about. And that's synonymous with full enlightenment. To transcend self-centeredness is to attain awakening, to attain full enlightenment. So the Buddha responds, monk, regarding any body, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, using correct wisdom, one accurately sees every body in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Regarding any feeling, recognition, thought, or consciousness, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, using correct wisdom, one accurately sees every feeling, recognition, thought, and consciousness in this way. This is not mine, I am not this is not myself. Monk, knowing and seeing in this way, there is no I-making, my-making, or tendency towards conceit as regards this body, its consciousness, and all external appearances. So here again, he's presenting a practice where we go through the five khandhas and clearly see each one in all of its potential iterations as this is not mine. This doesn't belong to me. I am not this, and this is not myself. This doesn't define me. So This is not me, this is not mine, this does not define me. So once again, this can be done as a meditation practice. So scanning through the khandhas, scanning through these 5 components, and constantly reminding yourself, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. It's just a function of the universe. It's just a function of the natural world, but it's not me, and it doesn't belong to me. There's a number of suttas where the Buddha starts by saying, monks, abandon what is not yours. And what is not yours? The body is not yours. Feeling is not yours. So he goes through this. He's like, the body is not yours. Abandon it. Feeling is not yours. Abandon it. Perception is not yours. Abandon it. He goes through it in this way. So it's recognizing everything in body and mind is not mine, not me, not myself. And here's where the sutta gets juicy. Then this line of thought arose in the mind of a certain monk. Apparently, the body is not self, feeling is not self, recognition is not self, thoughts are not self, and consciousness is not self. What self will experience the actions performed by not self? Uh-oh, somebody didn't get it. I know someone's laughing. And here's where, and the Buddha makes an amusing response, of course. He says, then the Blessed One, after reading the thoughts of that monk, addressed the monks. Monks, it is possible that some foolish man here who has not understood, who is immersed in ignorance and dominated by craving, might think to override the teacher's instructions by thinking, apparently the body is not self, feeling is not self, recognition is not self, thoughts are not self, and consciousness is not self. What self will experience the actions performed by not self? Monks, I will question you about the teachings you have learned from me. So I'm going to explain this a little bit before we go into the Buddha's, what the Buddha does next. What the monk is thinking, so the confused monk, what he's thinking is, okay, so apparently the 5 khandhas are not self. So that means there must be some other self apart from the 5 khandhas, and that other self is experiencing the karmic consequences of what's going on with the 5 khandhas. So the monk is presuming that there's another self, that self is something somehow apart from the 5 khandhas, but that nonetheless it experiences the consequences. It experiences the causes and conditions related to the 5 khandhas. Which means that this other self, apart from the 5 khandhas, is somehow still bound to the 5 khandhas. So that seems to be what this monk is believing. So he still has this really strong attachment to belief in self. And since the Buddha just clearly said that nothing in or related to the 5 khandhas is self, then the monk conceives that, well, there must be something disconnected from the 5 khandhas that's self, but yet somehow still is bound up with the karma of the 5 khandhas. So the Buddha's like, okay, this guy didn't get it. So I'm going to ask you guys the questions, and you give me the answers. So the Buddha says, what do you think, monks? Is the body permanent or impermanent? And they reply, impermanent, Bhante. Is that which is impermanent a source of suffering or a source of happiness? Suffering, Bhante. Is it appropriate to regard that which is impermanent a source of suffering and subject to alteration as this is mine, I am this is myself? Certainly not, Bhante. What do you think, monks? Is feeling, recognition, thought, or consciousness permanent or impermanent? And they give the same answer, impermanent, Bhante. Is that which is impermanent a source of suffering or of happiness? Suffering, Bhante. Is it appropriate to regard that which is impermanent a source of suffering and subject to alteration as this is mine, I am this is myself? Certainly not Bhante. And then the Buddha says, therefore, monks, regarding any body, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, using correct wisdom, one accurately sees every body in this way. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. Regarding any feeling, recognition, thoughts, or consciousness, past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, using correct wisdom, one accurately sees every consciousness in this way. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. Monks, the learned noble disciple who sees in this way, it should be learned disciple of the noble ones. So I'll fix that a bit later. The learned disciple of the noble ones who sees in this way becomes disenchanted with the body, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with recognition, disenchanted with thoughts, disenchanted with consciousness. Disenchantment causes dispassion. Dispassion liberates. When liberated, there is the knowledge liberated. One understands, birth has been eliminated, the holy life has been consummated, what was to be done has been done, there will be no return to this state of existence. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the Blessed One's statement. While this explanation was being spoken, the minds of 60 monks were freed from the taints by means of non-clinging. So here again, the Buddha is emphasizing regarding the five khandhas as not self, because there's nothing else that can be regarded as self. So the other monk was trying to conceive of something apart from the five khandhas, which is self, and yet is still subject to the karma of the five khandhas. But anything we conceive of is just some form of body, feeling, recognition, mental formations, or consciousness. Whether past, future, or present, internal or external, subtle or not subtle, inferior, superior, far or near, it's all just some variation on body, feeling, recognition, mental phenomena, and consciousness. So there's nothing we can find which is not in some way connected to the five khandhas, all of which are not me, not mine, not myself. So when we see in this way, then we recognize that there's absolutely nothing to hold on to. There's absolutely nothing which we can cling to as me or mine. So then what comes up is disenchantment. So nibbida, disenchantment. Nibbida literally means not seeking. So we stop seeking for the five khandhas. We stop seeking for happiness in the five khandhas. We stop seeking self-identity in the five khandhas. We lose our obsession with the five khandhas. We're no longer under the spell of samsara. So with disenchantment comes dispassion, which is the absence of desire and lust for any part of samsara. And with the absence of desire and lust for any part of samsara, then one is freed from samsara, and one attains full awakening. And it says here that while listening to this sutta, 60 monks realized its meaning and attained enlightenment. So this is something which is really important to reflect on and contemplate. So that's the end of this discourse. At this time, if there's any questions or comments, we can go ahead and take some questions and comments.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. And hello to a few new friends, Galaxy, Yenny, Diane, Sally, and Suzanne. Good to see you. And Marielle, welcome all of you. And Kyle is asking, one thing that I have always struggled with regarding not self is that the five khandhas are not self, not ours, but kamma is ours. I believe it is said that it follows us like a shadow.
Technically, kamma is also not yours. But that doesn't mean you can escape it. So I would more say that karma is directly bound to the 5 khandhas. So as long as we identify as the 5 khandhas, then we will experience the karma of the 5 khandhas. Okay.
Jan says, Bhante, when meditating on non-self, should we use all the khandhas as contemplation and meditation, or just use one khandha which there is a strong sense of self or self-identity?
Either way. So you can pick one khandha to focus on for the course of the meditation, or you can cycle through all 5 of them. So it's fine to experiment a bit with different ways of practicing with this. So try doing one at a time. Try doing all 5 in sequence. You can even do all 5 all at the same time, though that's a little more difficult. Yeah, experiment. As long as you're cultivating the perception of not self, it's fine. But make sure you're not leaving anything out. So if you tend to focus on certain khandhas, that's fine. Just make sure you also get around to the other khandhas at some point. So you're not leaving anything out. Okay.
These were the only 2 questions as of now, but there might be more appearing. Is
pretty straightforward sutta then. Not much to be said.
Oh, hello, Miguel, watching from Chile, who is thankful for your teachings. And Bhante, would you say that there is any difference, or if there is, can you explain what kind of difference there is in terms of, for example, mindfulness of feelings and contemplating the khandha, the Vedana khandha? Is it the same or is it different?
Yeah, it's the same.
The same?
Yeah, so I don't know. I think we talked about this a bit when we were going through Satipatthana, that the first 2 Satipatthanas correlate directly to the first 2 khandhas. And then the last 2 Satipatthana correlate to the other 3 khandhas, just not precisely. Yeah. But the first 2 correlate exactly.
And Kevin says, it seems the more I study suttas, the more I see different ways to achieve enlightenment. The 4 Noble Truths I thought was necessary. So how does this fit with that?
Well, because this is assuming that you already have an understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. You already have at least a basic intellectual understanding of the 4 Noble Truths, which is why you're trying to cultivate not self in the first place. Because cultivating not self is a way of letting go of the cause of dukkha, realizing the cessation of dukkha, and it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay. Well, I mean, if that's the end of it, there's nothing else to talk about.
Let's see. Kevin says, bravo. I even said bravo with an American accent instead of bravo. Bradley says, I had a question, but I forgot. Give me 1 second. Not so fast, Bhante. Oh, and Mike brings up something interesting. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but this seems like an ultimate form of disassociation to some very subtle level of mind.
Are you assuming that there's another mind apart from the 5 khandhas?
I think what he's probably referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, is that instead of accepting reality as it is, you are refusing or you're disassociating with it. So you're like, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am.
So it's important to recognize that through these practices, one has a very clear awareness of all 5 khandhas. So I'm looking up now the word dissociation because I'm not quite clear. I know that it's considered a disorder in modern psychology, but I don't know exactly what they mean by it. Yeah, it's defined as a detachment from reality. That's how dissociation is defined, as detachment from reality. So losing touch with reality. But that's actually the exact opposite of what we're doing in Buddhist practice. In Buddhist practice, we're trying to clearly see reality exactly as it is, without any alteration, rewriting, transformation, or distortion. We're trying to see reality exactly as it is, and to recognize that it's impersonal. So this is quite different from dissociation as it appears to be defined in modern psychology. Yeah, we're not trying to get away from reality. We're trying to clearly see reality exactly as it is. So this is one reason why, again, when the subject of pain comes up, people often say, oh, should I just ignore the pain? And the answer is no, absolutely not. That's the worst thing you can do. We should pay full attention to it. Because through paying full attention to it, you understand it. And by understanding it, then it doesn't affect you. But the reason it doesn't affect you is because you clearly feel it and fully understand it. So that's quite a bit different from trying to cut yourself off from an experience, trying to reduce an experience. A Buddha completely, thoroughly feels absolutely everything in body and mind. But a Buddha knows that it's not me, not mine. Okay?
Thank you, Bante. And Sally says, the hardest part for me is volitional formation. So should I substitute the sentence, I want enlightenment, instead of something else?
Well, I mean, that would be more wholesome than many other things. But better is just to let your mind be silent most of the time. Let the mind be quiet. Okay.
And Sally also asks, why did the Buddha answer the last monk's question by everything is impermanent? How does this relate self outside of the 5 khandhas?
Well, more what I get here is that the Buddha is returning to there being to the fact that our experience is just of the 5 khandhas, that we don't experience anything other than the 5 khandhas. We don't experience anything outside of the 5 khandhas. So this monk is hypothesizing a self which is disconnected from the 5 khandhas and yet somehow still experiences the consequences of the 5 khandhas. And the Buddha is basically pointing out, well, there actually is nothing outside the 5 khandhas. And because the 5 khandhas are all impermanent, dukkha, and subject to change, then it doesn't make any sense to regard it as me or mine. So that doesn't leave us with any place to pin our sense of self. You have to pin the sense of self to something. But every something is just some iteration of the 5 khandhas, one or another of the 5 khandhas. Okay? I'm just waiting for the cat to knock the vase over on my head.
And Kevin says, está un poquitín gordito el Stan, which means he's a little bit fatty, the little Stan.
He is. He's a pudgy kitty.
Yes, he managed to trick our residents into giving him lots and lots of food, pretending that he was always starved and about to die.
Anyway,
he's a greed type.
Coming back to the sutta.
Liz asks, should karma be thought of simply as a residual thing?
I don't understand what you mean by that. Yeah, what do you mean by residual thing?
If you can give more context, Liz, that would be helpful. And Sally says, how to lose passion and interest in volitional formations. I have strong passion for it.
Who asked this?
Sally.
So cultivate a passion for the Dhamma. So in a handful of suttas, the Buddha uses the term Dhamma Raga, which is passion for the Dhamma. So cultivate passion for the Dhamma. That's wholesome. That's good. That will support you.
And Bradley is saying, I remember reading in a couple of suttas that arhats have put an end to karma. Does this have relation to the 5 khandhas?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, karma is directly tied to the khandhas. So since an arhat no longer identifies as the 5 khandhas, since they're not bound to the 5 khandhas, then they also are not bound to the karma that is connected with the 5 khandhas. Okay.
So Liz is clarifying her question. How does karma fit into this? Can one disassociate from it?
So again, as I understand it, karma is cause and effect in relationship to the 5 khandhas. It's the operation of cause and effect in relation to the 5 khandhas. So by recognizing that the 5 khandhas are impersonal, not me, not mine, not myself, then also is recognizing that karma is impersonal, not me, not mine, not myself. So we stop taking it personally, which means it doesn't affect us anymore. It doesn't bother us anymore.
And Suzanne is asking, so reincarnation is inherent to Buddhism. What is it that is reincarnated?
So first off, you normally use the word reincarnation. We normally use the word rebirth, which has a subtle distinction in meaning. And actually, I gave a talk on this a little while back. It's called Who Gets Reborn or What Gets Reborn?
Karma, what is reborn? It's on the YouTube actually page, I think, of this, like the featured video or something like that. So you can watch it and have a 30-minute or 40-minute explanation on it.
Yeah.
Very thorough, very great talk. And Bradley says, so they still experience the results of past karma, but without suffering from it when painful or clinging to it when pleasant?
So what we see continuing after being attains awakening is we see continuing the remains of the karma from before they attained awakening, continuing to play itself out until it's completely done. But yeah, an arhat is not the least bit bothered by this.
And Suzanne is not, how do you say?
Satisfied?
Yes. What incurs the karma and who pays it?
Watch the talk. I explain all of this in great detail.
Maybe in a nutshell, you can give a snippet.
This question doesn't lend itself well to short answers.
You can't get away from it. You got to watch the talk, yeah. Suzanne.
Also, I get this question all the time, which is part of why we have a talk recorded on the subject matter.
Yes, one of the frequently asked questions. If there is no self, who gets reborn?
Yeah, watch the talk. It explains this in much detail.
And Sally says, so is it better to use sentence like practice Dhamma for enlightenment rather than I want to get enlightenment?
Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah, that's good.
This morning has very Zen answers. Very short. There's not more questions. Would you... Okay. Sally says, also when we make volitional formations, how to avoid falling into future clinging. Quote, may the 5 khandhas be thus in the future, mind-blowing me.
Yeah, well, you're already on the right track in that you're recognizing that danger. You're recognizing the danger of falling into attachment to a future condition. So just recognize that you actually don't have much control over the future condition of body and mind. And recognize that any condition of body and mind is just dukkha. It's always going to be unsatisfying, and it's always going to be impersonal. So there's no sense in trying to aim at any particular future state of being. And there's no sense in latching onto it as me or mine. So the solution, as always, is to see it as not me, not mine. Just impermanent, unsatisfying, and not self. Okay.
Bradley says, I remember those times when people asked the Buddha these questions, and his responses were quite entertaining, but helpful, of course. Yeah, it's great. Mark says, definition of disassociation, separation of normally related mental processes resulting in one group functioning independently from the rest. Still curious if the one group is this, Still curious if the one group is this subtle part of mind. Maybe I'm being pesty, so sorry.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you read it one more time, please?
Separation of normally related mental processes resulting in one group functioning independently from the rest. Still curious if the one group is this subtle part of mind.
Yeah, Buddhism is about unifying the mind. We're not about separating the mind into multiple distinct compartments. So through samadhi, we unify the mind, we collect the mind together. And when the mind is collected, then we develop clear understanding of the nature of experience. So Buddhist practice is not about fragmenting the mind. Not at all. Yeah, we don't do that. We unify and collect the mind, and then we understand it.
I think here we're probably getting into those sort of areas of apparent conflict between Buddhism and Western psychology in terms of the aim of the practices. So psychology is meant to make you a functional individual of society. And Buddhism is not particularly concerned about creating conformist individuals, but actually that's why it's called a practice that is against the stream. So I think that's the perhaps the issue that we're encountering here. Mark is also asking, so who or what is understanding the nature of experience? Seems paradoxical.
Why do you think there needs to be a who? Why can there not simply be an understanding? So Ajahn Punnadhammo, who comes here from time to time when there's not a global plague, Ajahn Punnadhammo likes to use the simile of the green goblin. He says it's like you have a car, and you're deeply convinced that your car is piloted by a little green goblin who lives inside the car somewhere. But then your auto mechanic friend says, no, the car is operated by the engine. And then you're like, well, the green goblin must live inside the engine. And the auto mechanic says, no, it's actually pistons inside the engine that drive the engine in order to turn the wheels of the car. And then you say, so the green goblin, maybe it lives in the pistons. And then you're like, so the green goblin must live in the spark plugs. And so gradually, the auto mechanic walks you through the functioning of every component of the car until eventually you realize that the green goblin is simply not a necessary component of understanding how a car operates. That a car operates perfectly fine without a little goblin involved at any point in order to make it function. So the point of the simile is that that's exactly how we relate to body and mind. We think, there must be a self, there must be a soul, there must be some kind of ongoing being that is experiencing this or operating this or in control of this or controlled by this. But as we examine the interrelated causal conditional nature of all the components of body and mind, eventually it becomes clear that there doesn't need to be a soul involved at any point of this. There doesn't need to be a true self or an ultimate self. It really can just be an interrelated mechanical operation of causes and conditions, of causality unfolding. Okay?
Yeah. And Bradley says, I'd say, though, that dissociation is still not exactly what not self means, even in modern psychology. Usually, someone who's experiencing disassociation or depersonalization feels hazy, depressed, anxious, and or detached from reality, which is what makes it pathological, which is what we see in people who experience trauma, for example. Yeah, thank you, Bradley, for specifying that. He also mentioned something that Ajahn Brahm said, or at least he thinks it's Ajahn Brahm, saying one useful way to look at the khandhas is to look at them as belonging to nature, for example, as the four elements.
Yeah. So also I've just been briefly looking at some things on dissociative disorder as defined in Western psychology. And yeah, this is definitely not what we're doing in Buddhism. Not at all. Again, we're trying to develop a clear, direct, blissful wisdom, a direct, joyful knowing of our experience. We're not trying to disconnect from our experience at all.
And Diane says, I'm sure my tendency to overthink things is standing in my way of understanding this. Will meditating on this help me to wrap my mind around it? Is it even necessary to wrap my mind around it?
So we're more interested in the experience rather than necessarily a detailed cognitive understanding. Though there is some connection between these. You do need a certain amount of cognitive understanding in order to cultivate the experience. And as you cultivate the experience, then your cognitive understanding will become clearer. But usually we place more emphasis on the experience. So try perceiving body and mind as not me, not mine. Try it out and see how that changes your understanding of it. Usually the recommendation is actually to start with developing the perception of impermanence because it's easier. It's less threatening to our sense of self. So we start by developing a perception of impermanence, the recognition that everything is insubstantial and constantly changing. And then it's easier to see that things are also impersonal, that things are not me, not mine. If things are insubstantial, how could they possibly be me? If they're constantly changing, how could they possibly be mine? So if you find directly contemplating not self difficult, well, so do most people. So you're not alone in this. So start with impermanence. It's much easier. And in order to do the perception of impermanence well, it helps to have strong samadhi. So start with samadhi. Work on unifying and collecting and stabilizing and taming the mind through samadhi. Which also, again, it's more straightforward. You just pick something and hold your mind on it. It's not that complicated. It's not necessarily easy, but it's not complicated. Okay?
Sally's saying the car simile is really blowing my mind. Yeah, it's pretty good. And Elaine says, yes, Ayasoma, that is exactly what I have been analyzing and mulling over. Question to self, how can I integrate evidence-based psychological techniques with said Buddhist practice? Somebody pro SBI has done this, and I just can't find the right books. Suggestions? A lot of what the Lord Buddha said fits in nicely with cognitive behavioral psychology. So Elaine is actually a licensed clinician, so she's not a Karen on Facebook. She actually knows what she's talking about. And she says, but the dissociative stuff intrigues me. Intellectualizing this, yes. Need to get back to sitting, walking, and mindfulness, right?
Mm.
Do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah, it's really important to constantly cultivate this sharp, clear, intense awareness of our physical reality. So this is part of the aspect of Satipatthana practice. It's being clearly, intensely, sharply aware of body and mind. Objectively, as much as possible, impartially, but clearly, intensely aware. Again, I've been looking a little bit at some things on dissociative disorder, and again, there's a lot of things about feeling like one's in a fog or spaced out, feeling like the world is kind of like dull and hazy and distant. So none of this sounds remotely like what we're trying to do in Buddhism. So it's necessary to cultivate this sharp, clear, intense, detailed awareness of body and mind. And it's through that intense, detailed awareness that we can start to recognize that it's just a causal process unfolding. And it's not me, it's not mine.
And Bradley says, I found that the direct experience of these seemingly lofty concepts really comes bit by bit with time, for better or for worse, lol. and that it really does fit in with the entire path, from generosity all the way down to insight. And Sally says, yes, Bradley, if this association means non-self, then all of Brabant is our hat. You guys are so funny. And Elaine says, Buddha was the greatest psychologist ever. You two are sneaking up on him. Yeah, it's true that he was a great psychologist, even before psychology was a word, was a thing.
Okay, anything else?
I think that's all for this morning. But in less than 12 hours, we will have, once again, Bhante Sudaso sharing more Dharma, and he will be talking about silent illumination.
Oh.
See, very happy, one of his favorite topics.
Yeah.
So, and I believe that also Sally is quite interested in that, but she also says, I like this Q&A sutta a lot. Wonderful, because we're going to have more and more coming up. So yeah, so we can keep up with our practice. So this evening, once again, Bhante Sudaso will be sharing Dhamma, and tomorrow morning we'll be doing chanting and meditation, and tomorrow evening there is monk chat again. So if you have any questions, pile them up in the next 24 hours, and actually more than 24 hours, 30 hours, however long it's that, and bring them up for a monk chat on Friday evening. And then on Saturday morning, special guest star at BNN will be Bhante Akaliko from Australia, who some of you have met in person already, and some of you have met virtually already. And if you haven't met him at all, then you'd better log in on Saturday morning to come and say hello and listen to his wonderful Dhamma. And then in the evening, I think we'll be talking about, Bhante Sudaso will be talking about the Big Bang theory in Buddhism. And then starting Sunday, we'll have every day, we will be focusing on Aparami for 10 days.
Okay.
Great. All right. Oh, and Elaine has something else to say. Bhante, have been thinking that dissociative states may be poorly integrated past lives, or rather predominant reappearance of past lives memories.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't have much experience in dealing with people who suffer from dissociative disorder, so I can't speculate. But yeah, that sounds possible. Just from looking a little bit about dissociative disorders, it also looks like really bad mindfulness, like really incredibly bad mindfulness, coupled with a strong aversion to one's experience. So a strong dislike of one's experience and a strong desire to be apart from one's experience. So yeah, there might be some connection to poorly integrated past life memories. I don't know. Yeah, but just looking at it, it's like, yeah, really bad mindfulness and aversion to one's experience. That's what it really looks like to me.
And I forgot to mention that it's the Upasata tomorrow, so you can take the precepts. You'll have the opportunity to take the precepts with Bante in the morning. All right. And no, Sally, it's not a weekend retreat. What we'll be offering on, it will be just talks and yeah, the usual program. So morning and evening. So no extra 2:30 p.m. meeting this weekend, but perhaps next weekend something will happen. We need to work on the schedule. All right. Well, have a great and see you this evening.